Hi, welcome to the Catholic Corner. I'm Monsignor Walter Nolan. You know how sometimes in your life you meet people or come across someone who's very, very special and they really touch your life and almost change your thought patterns a little bit? Well, my guest today is a man of that caliber. He's a professor at Loyola College in Maryland. He's a renowned speaker and author of over 40 books. In 1996, for his service to the Church, His Holiness Pope John Paul II awarded Dr. Robert Wicks the Papal Medal Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice. I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Wicks when he was addressing the Catholic educators in our diocese at St. Raphael's Church in Yardville. I spoke with him about his latest book, Riding the Dragon, 10 Lessons for Inner Strength in Challenging Times. A great book, a great man, and I enjoyed sitting down talking with him because he's a great storyteller. And I love to listen to stories and also to tell stories. And I remember even saying to him, I hope you don't mind, Dr. Wicks, but I've stolen a few of his stories for my homilies. He smiled and said, anytime. You'll enjoy Dr. Wicks. He's a beautiful man of faith, and a beautiful man who, around his storytelling, tells us about life and life with God. Dr. Wicks, it's a real pleasure meeting you. I've read much about many of your books, and your latest book now is Riding the Dragon.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
What prompted you to write this book, and what kind of an impact do you think it will have on folks who read it?
Well, people are having such a hard time today. There's so much stress in the air, not just 9/11, but financial stress, health problems, psychological problems, stress in the church. So my hope was that people could read the book and not avoid the stress, but deal with it in a healthy fashion that actually can even help them grow.
So it's not that we're trying to hide stress or put it in our socks, it's to say, face it.
Yeah. But you also want to realize that there is distress in our life that we don't have to have. We tend to make trouble for ourselves as people. And if we can avoid that, we can cut our stress in half. Just that simply.
And at least from what I've read, or some of the doctors I know, it seems like stress is one of the leading, I don't know if I say killers, but it certainly takes away a lot of our energy and a lot of our productivity.
It does. It saps us. But it also, if stress in minor levels encourages us to move on and to make changes and challenges us. So stress in itself, if it's a reasonable proportion, is fine. Makes sense. But it's when it gets out of hand that the problem is, it can lead to medical problems. The thing is, too, with those medical problems, in some cases, once you get to a certain point, even eliminating the stress or lessening it is not going to change the medical problem.
Once the onset happens.
Once it happens, then you're stuck.
Doctor, you talk about a failure and darkness in our lives, and that darkness can be a negative thing for us. Instead of talking about putting failure in perspective, letting go and descending into the basement of your soul and entering into your own shadow. Many people try to avoid these shadows, I think, or our dragons, as I believe you call them. Right. Why is it so important that we face the dragons, as you state in your book, and not slay the dragon?
Well, I think when we face things directly, just even physiologically, if you look at things that disturb you directly, the initial level of intensity changes. You can't keep it at that level. So from just a physiological reason, it's better to look at things directly and they'll lessen at some point. But also we can learn from them. I think that I learned a lesson a long time ago that everything negative said about us, no matter how poor the motivation of the person saying it, is true to some extent. And if we can mine those truths, if we can see those failures, for whatever we can learn from them, it can really help us to be free. So I think that we really can learn from our failures, mistakes, doubts, if we look at them directly.
Doctor, does that take a lot of grace? It seems to me that oftentimes if somebody criticizes us in a negative way, we always want to fight back and say, no, that's not true, even though we might really deep down believe it.
Three mistakes that we make is, one is arrogance, where we project the blame out. It's always everybody else's fault. The second mistake, or sin if you want to call it, is ignorance, where we condemn ourselves. Even God doesn't do that. And the third mistake is discouragement, because we want immediate results. What I try to do is get people to be intrigued about their behavior, intrigued about their failures as well as their successes. Our growing edges often occur when we take our gifts to an extreme. So for me, for example, I travel around, I have mouth will travel. If I, in a sense, really let my passion out and I'm intrusive in people's lives, it doesn't work. But if I'm passionate but keep some gentleness there along with that passion, I can give people room to do their thing as well. So you learn by your failures in terms of how to pace yourself, how to buff your edges. That can be very helpful, but it's hard to look at them. So the first thing to do is to really allow yourself to be upset. It's natural when you fail or somebody says something to you that you don't like. But once that emotion then lowers, then I think what we can do is look and see what we can learn from it. Otherwise, it's a waste.
It's almost like doing a little theology with your life every day, seeing death, resurrection, and see out of the deaths of our life, how do we rise up out of that?
That's right. As psychologists and psychiatrists and helpers, what we often do is what we call a counter-transferential review after an intense day. And by that I mean we get in touch with our feelings, you know, and you have to be honest. What made me sad? What made me angry? What upset me? What sexually aroused me? Then we look at what we were thinking to see what kind of dysfunctional thoughts we have. And then we look at our beliefs, our schematas. What am I believing that's not true about myself and the world? That's very much like a theological reflection, where at the end of the day, people in ministry will often do that reflection. They'll pick out the events of the day, specific events, and that's very important, because people's repentance is too general and their gratitude too vague. It has to be more like Scripture, where there's specific stories and events. So you look at the events, you look objectively, what happened, subjectively, how did I feel about it, and then in light of the gospel, in light of what you believe theologically and spiritually, you learn from it so you can change personally and ministerially. You change personally as a parent. You change personally as someone who's a friend to others. And you learn about yourself, and you're different, and you grow. Well, those are the kinds of things I think we need to do at the end of the day, whether we're a helper or we're not a professional helper.
And so much better to do that than to, get angry, take a drink, just go to bed and let all that fester in us while we're trying to get a night's sleep?
Well, what happens is the only memory that's going to hurt you is the one forgotten, because it's going to eat away quietly and lead to patterns of behavior that you won't be aware of, but it's happening. And there's nothing wrong with taking a drink. There's nothing wrong with occasionally letting out anger. It's how you do it. You know, it's if you do anger in a shotgun way, you know, if you're drinking to medicate yourself, if you're working to medicate yourself, you can even medicate yourself with prayer or religion, then you don't experience yourself and you don't experience the living God.
And it seems there'd be no growth.
I don't think so. I really don't.
Doctor, you quoted David Brazier in your work. I think he worked with Zen therapy, and he stated that these days we are apt to seek out a therapist to help us get the dragon back into the cave. And Zen, by contrast, offers dragon riding lessons. It's I like that. What are some of the ways that you can suggest to our audience how to ride the dragon?
Well, yeah, what he says, it's interesting. Brazier is afraid that, in fact, what we'll do is take the dragon of the truth and push it back into the cave and return to what Freud called was a state of ordinary unhappiness. And what he's saying is you've got to ride these dragons. You have to go with your joys, but you also have to go with your angers and your sadness and your fears. And the way he suggests you do that is by recognizing them and understanding them. And the way you do that, I suggest for most people, is what gets you really upset. What gets you upset is not just the event, but the interpretation you put on it. So your adolescent daughter or son won't listen to you. Well, that's upsetting, but what else is upsetting to you about that? Is it just that they're misbehaving or they're not following what you suggest? What else? And it's often a concern that we want to control things. We want to make sure things go the way we want them to. Well, we have to begin to take a look at that. When someone criticizes us, we often quickly respond with an answer rather than thinking, well, what might be in this criticism that can be helpful? So I often ask people, when you get emotionally upset, that's a great flag to learn one of the dragon riding lessons about yourself. Another is when we make a big argument intellectually about something. Well, we may feel strongly about the principle, but what else is going on? We don't question ourselves far enough, and I think dragon riding lessons teach us to do that.
I don't know if this is part of what you're saying, but I remember I heard a story a long, long time ago that I'll kind of shorten, about a boy found a bottle on a beach, and the voice in there said, "Let me out." He let him out, and this great big genie came out and was going to devour the little boy, and finally said, "How'd you get in the bottle?" The genie went back in the bottle, and he put the cork back in, and the genie said, "Let me out, let me out." And he said, "I'll let you out under one condition, that you'll be my slave, and I can control you." Now, I don't know if that's exactly, we don't want to just control things, but in a sense, it's almost letting that dragon to be put to use.
Sure, and you can use other imagery. People often ask for the Holy Spirit to come into their lives. But what are they really saying? Come into my life so I can control you. People say, I want to listen to God, but they don't want to be like Samuel. Where in Samuel we see, where, speak, Lord, for your servant listens. It's more, listen, Lord, for your servant speaks. We always want to control the situation.
Which leads us into a thought of meditation. I think you talk a lot in your books about meditation and the practice of meditation and being open to that wonderful God to help us grow in relationship with Him.
Right.
How do you explain that to our folks?
Well, a couple of simple things. Once a spiritual mentor said to me, Bob, he said, during the day you will feel the grace to pray. He said, and if you go make a phone call, it'll be blessed because you have a grace present. Or if you read a book, you'll be blessed. But maybe after you're doing that and you come back, the grace will be gone to pray. He said, try to take those graces as they come to you so that you're not learning about God, but you're meeting God. You're building a relationship with God. And the way I often do that is by having a rule of prayer in my life that moves us from chronos, secular time, to kairos, God's time. So there'll be liturgy in the week or the day where we meet God in Eucharist, but also in the Word and in each other. It'll be formal prayer during the day, and I hope we're not too sophisticated to have formal prayer, whether it's the Psalm, whether it's the Rosary. It may be just reflecting, because someone once said that life is something that happens while we're busy doing something else. So that if we can just stop on the way to a phone call, often taking some deep breaths, having some silence and solitude. Often I'll encourage people, take 2 minutes in the morning in silence, solitude, and wrapped in gratitude. And they'll say to me, only 2 minutes? And I'll say, well, how long are you doing it now? You can always do it for at least 2 minutes. And then they say, well, I guess that'd be nice. And I say, you don't got it. It's not nice, it's necessary, because the only time you'll have perspective in life is when things are difficult, when they're dark. And that's a terrible way to live your life. But with prayer, you'll be centered as you enter the day, and it'll be a different day.
And isn't that really the mystery of the Trinity? That somehow gets lived in the economy of our life, so to speak? That relationship, and all things become relationship?
Yeah, I think that Karl Rahner, the theologian, spoke about that. He said, we, as monotheists, have forgotten God's intrinsic community, what you would call the Trinity. And this relational thing of Jesus with the Father, and you have that sense of the Spirit, and then His relationship with us, and you read it in John's Gospel, that whole paraclete theme, you often feel this dynamic presence of God if you look for it. It's not that it's going to be there the way you want it. And maybe that's what Merton meant. He said, in prayer, in the silence, don't wait for God to speak, but instead, in the silence of prayer, let the silence speak for God. And what he was meaning is, when we're quiet and we don't have any preconceived notions, then God can speak to us in new ways.
And lovers do that sometimes in a human way, just naturally.
They do it, yeah. And people say that they're religious, but it's often flat because they don't have this real love relationship with God, and I think it's foolish.
What are some of the suggestions that you have, Doctor, for our own church communities? How can they support us in the struggles and the dragons in our own lives? I know you had a story in your book about Veronica.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of stories in that book, and the stories are basically a willingness for us to recognize the importance of being open to each other. and to offering a space to each other. When we offer a space to each other, I think possible things can happen that you would think would be impossible. And it doesn't mean doing a lot of things. I think people back off from church community, being involved in a society in the church, being involved in an activity in the church, being open in some way to some churches break down into small communities and being involved in that. I think that's essential. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was speaking at General Theological Seminary in New York to the Anglican seminarians years ago, and halfway through his presentation, one of the seminarians who was sitting out in the audience next to the dean nudged him and pointed it up and said, "Desmond Tutu is a holy man." And the dean looked back and said, "Well, how do you know he's holy?" And the young man didn't even blink. He said, "I know that Desmond Tutu is holy because when I'm with Desmond Tutu, I feel holy." Now, the question I think challenging each of us as Christians is, how do people feel when they're with us? Do they feel this space formed by a circle of grace, of love and freedom? Or do they feel our anger? Do they feel our need to be right? Do they feel our need to be followed? Do they feel our need to be seen as perfect or bright? What do people feel when they're with us? And I think if you have that question in your heart and you take part in your church community and you're open to receiving the support of fellow parishioners when you're having problems, it can be dramatically different.
I think that's what the Second Vatican Council really means when they call the church the people of God.
Yes.
It's that dynamic word that catches fire, so to speak.
Yeah, you have a lot of nice churches, but they're dead. You know, it's this dynamic thing. I don't get worried when I get in a church and people are angry or they're disagreeing, you know. If they're alive in the spirit and they're trying to really be passionate about what this church is about, then it's wonderful.
Maybe that's what Michelangelo felt when he did that great work in the Sistine Chapel with the finger of God touching Adam.
Yeah.
That's that same spirit that flows out. You wrote in your book, Doctor, contrary to popular thinking, I don't believe most people are self-centered today. And it seems contrary to what a lot of people think. In fact, in your experience, you feel the opposite is true.
I have seen very few people have come to me, and I work with helpers and healers, priests, nuns, physicians, nurses, relief workers, teachers, people who are on the line. And I've seen in them, and also in the people who come up to me after my talks, or people who write to me after reading Riding the Dragon, and I don't find that their problem is that they're not doing enough. I think instead they don't have an asceticism of crosses. They don't know which crosses they're being called to carry and which ones they're not. I think if you were to look at Christians today, they're involved so much that I think of a Yiddish proverb when I think of them. It goes, "Sleep faster, we need the pillows." There are so many demands for people today that it's ridiculous. We have to look at what we can do. Also, we need to do a real discernment of where is God in this. Everybody does the first several steps of what we need to do in life. One is they recognize the challenges in their family, at work, in themselves, at church. Number two is they diagnose the source of the challenge, which is fine. Then they plan what to do, which is fine. But the last two steps are important. The fourth step is do something. Do something after you've thought this through and prayed this through. And finally, after you do something, let God take care of the residue. That's why I think Scripture is important as well. Because when I feel lost, I'll often read the whole section of John, from John 10 to about 15. John 10, I've come to bring you fullness. John 14:18, this is my favorite. I'm not going to leave you orphaned, I'm going to come back for you. And John 15, you are my friend. We have to really let God take God's role.
John's gospel is really that gospel of reaching into the depth of the mystery of Jesus. And it starts out, he's walking down the street and he turns around and he said, he says, what do you want? Where do you live? Come and see. And then the whole gospel unfolds with the friendship that you enter into. It's just a marvelous gospel. Yeah. Simplifying your life as a suggestion that you make in your book to fight the tiredness, the exhaustion that we all get into. Most people I talk to say they're overextended, and many priests, religious, really feel these days that they're overextended. By using the process known to therapists as as the inner pruning of the person? Can we trim some of these externals in our lives and make our life more manageable? And what are some suggestions you would give us for that?
Well, I think the inner pruning thing is not so much a lot of techniques, but an attitude. There's a Zen saying that goes, face reality, and unwilled change will take place. Christians often use the concept of Jesus saying, don't worry about what you're going to say or do. The Spirit will give you the words, the actions. Well, that doesn't mean don't prepare, don't plan, but there's a big difference between planning and preoccupation. I think inner pruning makes us stop worrying so much about what people think. You know, people say, well, I can't help it. I worry all the time. Are the people going to misunderstand? I said, well, just picture my face over your shoulder saying, so many people think ill of you already. What's a few more? The reality is that I think we waste a lot of time in useless thinking. Inner pruning says, find what your charism, your gift is. Find a word for yourself. And find that word, that central name for yourself. You know, move where God is calling you. Don't be Abraham, be Abraham. Don't be Sarai, be Sarah. Be this person. So find, what is your central gift? So in my case, I think it may be passion. And then find a word to buffet. And for me, it's gentle, so that I'm not in people's faces. I'm not overwhelming them. And once you find that central word, then look for a theme for yourself. And then live out of that theme. For me, the theme is be clear and be not afraid, for you are loved by God. So I'm always emphasizing clarity and kindness when I work with people and myself. If you just have clarity, you're going to cause narcissistic injury and hurt people. If you just have kindness, there'll be no growth. But together, for me, that's wonderful. So when I look at my own life, what I'm being called to do, and others, I use those two words in that theme. Be clear and be not afraid, for you are loved by God, and use those two words for myself as a sense of identity. Then from that's how I make my schedule. That's how I decide what I'm going to accept and what I don't. That's how I realize that I need to take time for myself, because one of the greatest gifts we can share with each other is a sense of our own peace, but you can't share what you don't have. If people realize this is not just about them taking care of themselves, but about them taking care of themselves and pruning the unnecessary so that they can reach out to others in a healthy way when they're called, they would do it.
It sounds almost a little bit of Saint Therese of Lisieux when she said that when as a young child or young girl, young woman, I want to be a saint.
Right.
And it seems that sanctity is living out your own awareness of your call to God, because every one of us has a different kind of name, so to speak.
Right.
And whatever the name happens to be, and whatever that fullness of the name is, if we live that out, well, we live in God's grace.
Well, no one's ever put me before with Saint Therese of Lisieux, but I'll take it.
Well, you know, I thought of that because another chapter of your book, or at least a part of a chapter, talks in terms of doing little things. And that was her great experience of spirituality.
Right.
Do the little things.
See, I think we get caught into the world of success, you know. And I think it's crazy, because look at the little things that she did that we remember now, and they give us solace. How do you know whether they're little? They may be little in the eyes of the world, but they're not little in the eyes of God. And let's move to Teresa of Avila. It's not the size of the thing that you do, it's the amount of love you put into it. And I think that's the key element. It's doing these simple, small things, giving with a sense of mitzvah. And by that I mean giving and expecting nothing in return. That's really wonderful. I mean, it's marvelous.
You're a storyteller, and you're a story listener, I think. How do you see the stories of everyday life impacting on our own life?
Well, ecclesiology is finding your real story. That's what church is all about. I think we settle for scripts that are very narrow. Our stories are wonderful stories, and I think that each of us is connected. So when I listen to people, when I travel around the world, I'm open to those stories, because the stories of others are my story. And when I tell those stories, people can take more from the truth than from principles that are formulated for them.
And Dr. Wicks, you talk a lot about listening, but reading. Is reading should be a part of our lives?
I think people don't read enough, and I think reading really breaks us out of our small world and connects us with with the wonders of possibility in people's lives. That's why I suggested people read Scripture. I suggest that people read spirituality books. I suggest that they read good novels and autobiographies and biographies. Now, recently, a biography of Bede Griffiths came out by Shirley Du Boulay called Beyond the Darkness. Another wonderful biography of Shunryo Suzuki, the great Zen master, called The Crooked Cucumber. Experiences from Henry Nouwen in his Genesee Diary. Thomas Merton's, one of his final diaries that was published, called A Vow of Conversation. All of these things open us up. Kathleen Norris's book, Dakota, where it's just a wonderful, called A Spiritual Geography. It was a wonderful experience. Each one of those books calls me to get out of my little world. Each one of them gives me solace. Each one makes me recognize that I don't want my mistakes to be guilt that pulls me into the past and leaves me there, but rather give me a sense of remorse so I can learn from the past and move into the future. Good reading will help me do that.
And it also somehow binds us together as a family of God, in that we realize that maybe our thoughts are someone else's thoughts, and maybe our way of living is also someone else's living, and all leads to that wonderful, wonderful grace that we call God, and the wonderment of the great mystery. Dr. Wicks, it's more than a pleasure to be with you and to share your thoughts. God bless. Keep from this little priest here, I can tell you, you've touched an awful lot of people's lives, and I hope you don't mind if I use a little bit of your stories once in a while in some of my homilies.
No, thank you very much.
Dr. Wicks, God love you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did being with Dr. Wicks. As I said before, just a beautiful man. In his epilogue to his book, he says, be a dangerous listener. Listen dangerously and it will change your life. He goes on to tell us that listen as though it depends on everything that's possible. Listen closely, listen dangerously, listen as though your lives depended on it. Really means listening from the heart. When we listen from the heart, marvelous things happen. Marvelous things will change our life. I think listening from the heart is really allowing God to enter our hearts in an honest and most beautiful way. As we invite God to enter our hearts, we know that the truth and the love will be with us in everything we do. The Catholic Corner, Post Office Box 5147, Trenton, New Jersey, 08638. Call us, please, 609-406-7402, or we can be reached at tv@dioceseoftrenton.org. God bless. Keep your inner heart with God's love.